Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea Brown and this is my presentation on Henrietta Lacks and her unknowing contribution. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on a poor African American woman whose cancer cells were taken without her knowledge in 1951. These cells became known as one of the most prominent figures in American medical history, helping to develop everything from the polio vaccine to cancer treatments. However, Lacks herself died without ever knowing any of this. My argument is that Henrietta Lacks should be studied in the United States history courses because her story exposes how scientific progress in the United States was really made. Moving on to the contents, we have who was Henrietta Lacks, followed by what happened to her cells, led with racism, pain, and ethics. Moving on to law, justice, and legacy. Next would be why we must study Lacks, followed by our resources. Some biographical information and background. Henrietta Lacks was born in 1920 in Loretta Pleasant in a black tobacco farming community near Clover, Virginia. This is where her family worked as a tenant farmer, as found by Etheridge. Like many African Americans in the mid-20th century, she later migrated from the rural South to a more industrial area, Turner Station near Baltimore. This is where her husband worked in the street mills and she cared for her 5 children there, as found in Etheridge and Sage Reader, our textbook. When she developed severe pelvic pain and bleeding, she went to Johns Hopkins Hospital, which was the only real choice for free but segregated medical care for the impoverished African American patients in the area. This is where she was treated in the colored ward, as found by Stump and Baker. As a poor black woman in Jim Crow America, Lacks had a very little amount of power in the medical setting. This reflects what our course text describes as the structural limits on minority access to quality care and informed decision making. If you look over to the side, I have a photo saying Henrietta Lacks' story continues to inspire change in research, healthcare, and ethical standards. How does her legacy inspire you? By the end of this presentation, I would like if you guys could answer that question. Moving on to the HeLa and scientific breakthroughs. During one of her radium treatments for her cancer, doctors took biopsies from her cervical tumor. This led with them being sent to a lab without her consent or explaining that the samples would be used for research, as found by Stump. Researchers discovered that her cancer cells could divide and grow outside the body in a way that they had never, ever seen before. Concurrently, the author Baker says that they have never been seen ability to divide and grow outside of her body in culture, and notes that they have kept dividing for decades. Concurrently, these cells were named HeLa. This is the first 2 letters of her first and last name, and they became the first immortal human cell line. This allowed scientists to study the human cancer cells in a way that they couldn't before, as found in Baker and Etheridge. The HeLa cells were used in developing polio vaccine, gene mapping, in vitro fertilization, cancer, and even radiation research. Later, treatments for diseases like Parkinson's were also assisted. Stump points out that there are thousands of papers using HeLa cells and that the cells exist by trillions in labs worldwide, as found in Baker, Stump, and Etheridge. Moving on to medical racism and the pain myth. So, Stump explains that although treatment at Johns Hopkins was free for poor African American patients, it was silently conditioned upon the assumption that treatment gave the medical team rights to conduct research on patients' tissues. This meant that not only Lacks, but other black African American individuals effectively paid with their bodies. Her cells were taken and then used all over the world without her consent, and her family was not even told for roughly 20 to 25 years. And when the researchers finally did tell them, they used technical language that the family didn't understand, such as DNA and clones. This made Henrietta's daughter, Deborah, fear that she would run into her mom's clone on the street, as found in Baker. Also noted by Baker, the family was terrified that every time researchers injected the Ebola virus into Lacks cells, Henrietta was suffering pain. This shows how deeply they felt that her pain was never acknowledged or respected. Furthermore, our course text and Reardon both point out that Black patients have historically been assumed to be able to endure more pain. This disproportionately makes experiments a lot riskier. From surgeries on enslaved women to Tuskegee, the HeLa fits into this pattern of seeing Black bodies as more available for invasive research, as found in Sage Reader and Reardon. Moving on to law, justice, and legacy. Stump argues that when Henrietta's cells were taken, very few laws existed to protect her and others from unauthorized research. This case helped bring the issue of patient rights versus scientific responsibilities into the national debate. She later connects HeLa to legal decisions such as Moore versus Regents of the University of California. This is when the court ruled that patients have no property rights over tissues removed from their bodies. This means that cell lines can become highly profitable while the person and family gets absolutely nothing, as found by Stump. Concurrently, Peterson and Reardon both argue that HeLa forces us to move beyond individual consent. This asks for broader social justice questions, such as who benefits, who bears risks, and how race and class shape those answers, as found in Peterson and Reardon. The controversy over publishing the HeLa genome eventually led the National Institute of Health to create an agreement where members of the Lax family sit on a board that helps decide how genomic data is shared. Lastly, Stump concludes that Lax has reintroduced the human being to modern biomedical research and transformed forever the way researchers gather information and collect samples from human subjects. This directly shows how Henrietta Lax's story reshaped research ethics and regulation in American healthcare. Why she belongs in U.S. history. Stump points out that while HeLa cells brought in millions of dollars in profit, the Lax family can't even afford basic health insurance. This shows how minority bodies have underwritten American scientific progress while families are remaining marginalized and unappreciated. Our course text emphasizes that the history of minorities in America is more than about laws and protest. It also directly shows the everyday experiences of racism, gender inequality, poverty, and unequal citizenship in institutes like schools, prisons, and even hospitals. Henrietta Lax's story sits right at the intersection because she is not a famous activist or a famous protester or a famous artist. She was just an ordinary Black woman who had cancer, and her cells were used in an extraordinary manner without her knowledge. This raises issues of medical ethics, property, and racialized assumptions about pain. Lastly, studying Henrietta Lax in U.S. history courses would help students see that civil rights history is also written in exam rooms and laboratories, not only in ways of activists, but in ways of ordinary people. And this question about who feels pain, whose pain counts, and who gets to decide what happens in our cells are centrally the largest understanding to the minority experience in America, as found in Sage Reader and Stump. For these reasons, Henrietta Lax should be a standard part of U.S. history curriculum. Here are my resources that I have used with Baker, the Sage Reader textbook, Etheridge, Peterson, Reardon, and Stump. Thank you so much.